Hello, guten Morgen, Berlin. Hopefully it's fair to assume if you're here at a Datadog conference, you're either building applications, you're helping maintain reliability of applications, and many of you also just use data to make decisions. In fact, Maxime noted this earlier, you could argue in this era where everyone, all your competitors also have access to those latest models, it's the data, and by that really we're talking about your knowledge, your expertise, your subject matter expertise, your context that you bring into your offerings, your applications, your services. That is your differentiated advantage. That's what makes your offerings valuable and special. So shouldn't we make sure that data is in a good state? Let's make this even more concrete with some examples that our customers have shared at recent conferences. One of those is Ramp. They're an automated expense management platform, but they talk about this a lot, they also use data as a springboard for innovation. And just to make that even more specific, one of the offerings they're working on now, they recently spoke to, is using that expense data, combining it with upstream third-party data sources and the latest models to give their customers pages to track their software vendors. And they can look at the latest growth, retention, and adoption of these vendors. Really kind of an innovative new offering that you can imagine getting some eyeballs. Now imagine if you're putting that offering out there and your end users see incorrect data values, quickly your customers' trust in your brand would be lost. So Ramp is working hard to make sure data is clean throughout, and we'll look at what that can look like. Another example is Mux. They provide APIs for video streaming. Another sophisticated team with an innovative offering, but even then, all it took was one bug from an upstream application to make some reports about their users look as if their users suddenly dropped off, sending a shock through the business. That was completely unnecessary. And also, who can't relate to this? This is not a new problem. You look at a business dashboard, the data doesn't look right, and you either instantly lose trust in that dashboard, or worse, you use the data, make a bad decision, and then your reputation is impacted. And finally, third example, from some personal experience of mine at a previous product offering I worked on before Datadog, we were offering really critical data to our customers through our SaaS application that was used in official government filings, financial reports. So we basically saw if we weren't really on top of our, in that case, Spark pipelines, we knew about it from our customers. And I just saw in that case just how important, how critical this data is when it impacts a business's reputation or a human being's reputation. Started to take it a lot more seriously. But why is this hard? Why is this a problem in the first place? A couple reasons. One, first, what we see is a lot of the issues that occur in data are actually happening from upstream application changes from our well-intentioned software engineers that don't know how this data is used downstream in data pipelines or business dashboards. These teams are operating independently of each other. Luckily, this is starting to change, and AI is only accelerating this change with both teams realizing the dependencies actually in both directions, applications producing the data that goes downstream into a warehouse, but that then feeding into models that get used in these applications. So increasing the appetite, at least, for more collaboration. Another challenge, our tooling, our observability, traditionally doesn't focus on this. What we would normally see in an observability platform is things like, my Java service isn't throwing errors, seems fine. My consumers are up and running, my Postgres database is performing. And yet, under the hood, these silent failures are happening. Something in the contents itself isn't being caught. Third challenge, these systems are just getting more complex. Take this overly simplistic example diagram where we have one very simple application service feeding down into a data pipeline, batch and streaming. That then goes into models, reports, that then go back into applications. But in reality, we know each of these hops consists of multiple components, to say the least, that are changing regularly, often daily. At each step of the way, we have multiple different teams responsible for these technologies. So what can we do about it? First, let's start catching data issues that matter. Let's help the teams owning these data go from being reactive to angry Slack messages to proactive by catching issues and knowing about them before anyone else. But putting manual checks on what the data should look like feels not feasible. Luckily, machine learning can help us here. We've been working on this actually for quite a bit, and you see the impacts of some of the models we're working on, catching an anomaly, and what's actually a critical pricing data point to this example scenario. And in this case, I'm pulling this in with custom SQL so that data knows about this. But now I'm wondering, OK, but does this matter? So to get a bit more context, I flip to a view of lineage, and I see, indeed, this data set is used not only by some business dashboards and some downstream data sets, but also my RAG application, my vector database. OK, this matters enough to keep looking at it, but what happened? Upstream, I'm able to see not just the data lineage in terms of what data feeds into this data, but the applications changing the data along the way, and in this case, an error in a Spark pipeline. Drilling further, I'm able to see exactly the various stages of how that data was transformed and how that Spark application looked and ran with a specific execution. In this case, all of the really funky things that can go wrong in Spark weren't actually the problem. It was actually just the problem that the data wasn't being populated upstream. And looking even more upstream, because Datadog is also observing my application, I see it's this Kafka stream where a producer introduced a new feature, changed the schema, my consumer didn't know how to process it, my Spark pipeline didn't get the data. Lots of steps with lots of technologies. But I've just gone from being reactive to not even knowing about this issue to knowing about it before anyone else. And I've able to connect the dots between how this is all happening. And one of the ways Datadog is able to do this is because we're bringing data observability right next to application observability, what a lot of our customers already use us for. Another way we're able to do this is using open source standards like OpenLineage, which we're also contributing to heavily upstream if you look at the PRs in the OpenLineage Foundation. But I think what we see is, in order to catch these data issues for any teams who care about them, which increasingly is everyone, we need more than just a few simple data checks. We need to think about this holistically, and we talk about this as bringing observability across the data lifecycle. Stemming issues, catching issues in the data, but bringing them back to where the change actually happened, whether it's in the data pipelines or in our event streams or in our upstream databases and application services. Datadog Data Observability is currently in preview. A big thank you to all of our design partners here so far. I'm really looking forward to discussing this with those of you who were able to discuss with today here in Berlin. And thank you very much.